In programming, we always want to avoid doing extra work. If we can have a computer do something for us, we want to try to take advantage of that. Now, last time we saw how to start doing this by using variables. We did that by taking data structures and storing them inside of variables, and then using those variables to re-access the data structures again. This allowed us to use our data structures over and over without recreating them every single time. So essentially, the variables let us save things for later. Today, we're going to take this same idea of saving things for later a step further by saving our code inside of Python files. Python files are just regular files on your computer with two main differences. The first is that Python files contain lines of Python code. So while you may be used to text files and Word documents that contain text, maybe in an English syntax, for example, Python files are just going to contain Python syntax. And this syntax isn't any different than what we've done so far. It's the same syntax we've been using inside of the idle shell. We're just going to write it in a file instead. The second difference is that Python files end in a .py extension. This is something we'll talk about more throughout the video, but essentially .py is just a way of telling your computer, hey, the content in this file is going to be Python code, so don't go ahead and misinterpret things and think we're writing an essay. By saving our code in Python files, we can easily reuse it again in the future. And this idea is a really important concept called code reuse. Essentially, what code reuse means is you can write a program one time, and then you can run it again as many times as you want in the future. And this is going to be really helpful for us as we're moving forward. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's write a simple program that displays someone's phone number. Now we can do this in 3 steps. Step 1, store a phone number in a variable. Step 2, display some text explaining what the program's about to do. So in our case, that's just going to be, we're going to display the phone number. And finally, step 3, we can actually display the phone number, and we can use string concatenation to turn this into a sentence. Okay, now there's 2 main problems with this. The first one is the display that we're looking at is not very intuitive. Ideally, we only want to see the output of our programs. And when I say output, I mean these lines that Python's mirroring back at us. If you think about it, if someone was using this program, all they would want to know is what the program does, and then the display of the phone number. And the second problem, and probably the more important one, is if we wanted to run our program again, we would need to rewrite all of this code. There's no way for us to just reuse the 3 lines that we did and run it again. And we can fix this by using Python files. So to create a Python file, navigate to File and New File. Also, if you're on a Mac, you can press Command-N, and you'll see this window on the right over here. Now, in this new window, we can create a file that contains Python code. Now, before we try to recreate the 3-line program on the left over here, let's write a more simple program. Let's just do a single line that prints hello. Okay, and now in order to run this, we first need to save it. So you can go to File, Save, or press Command-S on a Mac, and you'll see this pop up right here. So we can give this program whatever name we want. Let's call it First Python Program. And notice that in the format field, it's set to Python files. This is the key thing that's going to actually save this as a Python file rather than a regular file. Now that we've saved it, we can go to Run and press the Run Module button, and this is going to actually execute our Python file. In other words, run all the code in the Python file. Okay, so whenever you run a Python file, you're going to see a few things in the output over here. And the first thing you'll see is this first part, restart. So when you run a Python program, there's a few setup steps that kind of happen in the background just to get things ready to run. And restart is just idle's way of saying, hey, we did that background stuff for you. The second thing you'll see is the location of the file we're about to run. And this is just where on your computer this file over on the right is saved. But you'll notice that something's missing here. We didn't see hello mirrored back at us. So previously when we wrote things like this, the idle shell would automatically mirror back the string that we used. And this is a key difference between the idle shell and Python files. So in the shell, everything we write is evaluated right away, and the results are shown to us immediately. In Python files, nothing is displayed on the screen unless you specifically tell Python to display things on the screen. And to do that, we can use a built-in function called print. This is going to be our second function, and you may remember the type function already. We type the word type, put a set of parentheses, put a data type inside of it, and then it'll tell us what data type that is. So since I put 1 here, it's telling us it's an int. Now the syntax for using print is going to be very similar, but instead of the keyword type, I'm going to use the keyword print. And then I'm going to put a set of parentheses, and then I'm going to put whatever I want to print out onto the screen. In our case, it's the word hello. And you'll see that this also works in the idle shell. So now all we're going to do is use the print function in our file, because in our file we need to tell Python specifically to print things on the screen. And now we can go ahead and rerun our program. And you can skip the save part. If you go to run module, it's going to prompt you to save automatically. So just go ahead and press OK. And this time we got the same thing at the beginning, but we actually did print the word hello. So now we have successfully created a Python file that prints hello. And next, what we want to do is modify things a little bit so that we can create the program we were trying to create over here. So let's go ahead and actually take these lines and just move them over. So first I'll get rid of print. Let's copy and paste creating the phone number variable. Then we'll copy and paste the display string. And then we'll copy and paste the final output where we're actually showing what the phone number is. Now if we run this as it is, nothing's going to happen because we're not telling Python to print, just like we saw with hello. So what we have to change here is to put a print statement for all the lines that we actually want to show on the screen. And that's just going to be the second two right here. Now, if you're wondering why we're not putting a print around this line, it's because all this line does is create a variable. The intent of this line is not to actually display anything, so we don't want to tell Python to display anything. We just want to create the variable phone number so that we can use it on this line down here. So now we can go ahead and run this. Cool. Now we're getting what we were trying to get the first time we wrote this 3-line program up here. Now, there's a few important things to point out here. First, because we saved these 3 lines of code in a file, we can run them as many times as we want without writing any more code. So I can go ahead and press run module, and it's going to rerun again. And I can do that again. Now I can keep doing this as many times as I want because our code is saved, so we don't need to rewrite it every single time. This is a big difference from how we were using the idle shell and using Python files. Another cool thing is if I want to make a small change to just a single line, I can do that without affecting any of the other lines. So for example, let's say we want to change this from saying this program will display a phone number to this program will display an awesome phone number. And we get the new output down here. And this is cool because all we had to do was change this one line and we didn't have to recreate the phone number variable or change the final print statement. So by saving our code in files, we can make small little changes to individual parts of our programs without needing to touch the other parts of the program that shouldn't be affected. Now, as we start to progress and learn more and more, our programs are probably going to start to get a little bit longer. And Python's files are really going to help a lot with that because since our files will get longer, we definitely don't want to rewrite everything from scratch every time. We want our programs to be written once, and we should have the ability to run them as many times as we want. Another thing we may want to do as our programs start to get longer is write little notes to ourselves to help us remember what our programs are doing. And Python has a cool way to do this with something called comments. So to write a comment, you start a line with the £, and then you can write any text you want. So in this case, maybe I want to remind myself that the line right under this stores a phone number in a variable. And because we started this line with this symbol, Python treats this as a comment, and that means that it does not try to interpret it as Python code. It knows that this is just a little note to ourselves, and it basically just ignores it when it runs the program. So we could go ahead and run this. And you'll see that there's no extra output here and nothing has changed. And you don't have to worry about any syntax or anything like that when you create comments. You could write anything you want to. Nothing's going to break. As you may remember, when we created this Python file in the first place, we made sure that it said Python files right here. And what this does in the background is inserts this .py extension to your file. And the .py is just a way of telling your computer that, hey, this is a Python file, so you should treat it like one. That means all the lines are going to be lines of Python code. They're not going to be regular English like you'd find in a Word document, for example. So to kind of see this working, one thing we can do is actually change this. Let's say we're not going to make it a Python file. Let's make it a text file. Now you can make it a text file in two ways. You could either just press text file here, but for this example, we're going to press all files. And then we can change this extension from .py to .txt. And when we do this, all of our syntax highlighting suddenly went away. And that's because our computer doesn't know that these are lines of Python code anymore, because we're telling it really explicitly that this is a text file, not a Python file. You can also see that in the background, what this actually did was create a second file. So we still have our Python file right here with this .py extension, and we also have this text file with the .txt extension. So let's go ahead and open our Python file again. You can just double click on it. And now we can see that the syntax highlighting is back. So what these file extensions actually do is help your computer know how to interpret the contents of a file. That's why when it's .py, we get all this pretty syntax highlighting. When it's .txt, it's kind of just regular text. So at this point, you may be wondering, when should I use the idle shell and when should I use Python files? In general, the idle shell is really useful whenever we want to test like 1 or 2 lines of code. And we kind of just want to see what it does and how Python behaves. A great example of this is when we wanted to see what this print function does. We didn't have to create a whole file or anything to test it. We just typed print and then put a string in there, and we saw immediately what it does. So idle shell is great when you want to test something and it gives you very rapid feedback. But in most other cases, we're going to want to gravitate towards files, and like we've been over, it's really so we can reuse our code. We don't want to keep writing the same things over and over. It would be really hard to make progress, especially when we're starting to approach writing slightly longer and more complicated programs. So now we know how to create Python files. If you made it this far, give yourself some credit. I know it's really easy to look at this and say, hey, we just made a file and wrote 3 lines of Python code in it. It's not a big deal. But actually, it really is. Every single piece of software, the most complicated things you can possibly think of, all start with an empty file and 1 or 2 lines of code. And that's exactly where we are right now. We're just starting. We opened up a new file and wrote our first lines of code in there. If you want to see more videos like this and continue learning Python with me, consider subscribing to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.